It had been raining all day, the kind of rain that seemed endless, soaking everything in its path. The streets were slick, the sky a heavy gray, and the dampness crept into your bones, refusing to let go. But for Mary, it wasn't just the rain that weighed on her. It was the sense of abandonment, the coldness that came from her own flesh and blood. She had been a mother all her life. From the moment she first held her son in her arms, she knew what sacrifice meant. Her life had never been easy, working long hours in factories, scrubbing floors, cooking meals, always giving, always putting herself last. But it was worth it because of her boy. She loved him with every fiber of her being. But now, standing on the side of the road, she felt like the world had turned its back on her. Her heart ached not just from the cold, but from the realization that the very people she had given everything to had cast her out. Her children, her own flesh and blood, had decided they no longer wanted her in their lives. She had lived in their house for years, contributing what little she had, but now, in her time of need, they had shown no mercy. They claimed she was a burden, a drain on their resources, and when her health had begun to fail, they told her she was no longer welcome. They wanted her gone. And so here she was, alone. The world around her seemed so much colder than it ever had before. The rain didn't stop, and neither did her thoughts. It was hard to accept, but she had no choice. There was nowhere to go, no family to turn to, no friends to lean on, just her. She wiped a tear from her cheek and pulled her coat tighter around her thin body. The day felt endless, but the feeling of being alone in this world was even worse. She had no idea how long she stood there, lost in thought, when a man's voice broke through the silence. "Are you all right, ma'am?" She turned, startled by the sound. The man stood a few paces away, his face partially hidden by the shadow of the alleyway, but his voice was kind. A kind that caught her off guard. She had not heard kindness like that in years. For a moment, she didn't respond. She simply stared at him, wondering if he would be the next person to offer her pity. She had seen enough of that already, but then something in his eyes made her hesitate. He wasn't looking at her with judgment. He wasn't looking at her like she was invisible. "No, I'm not all right," she replied, her voice cracking. She hadn't meant to say anything at all, but the words slipped out. The man's face softened. "I can see that. It's cold out here. Are you sure you don't need help?" Mary shook her head. "Help? What help is there for someone like me?" Her voice was bitter, filled with years of pain and frustration. She had asked for help too many times, only to be turned away. "You never know until you try," he said, taking a cautious step toward her. She eyed him warily. There was something about him that didn't quite fit. His clothes were neat, his shoes polished, yet he didn't look like someone who would typically stop to help a stranger in need. "What's your name?" she asked, her voice wary but curious. "Call me Thomas," he replied, offering a small smile. "And you are?" "Mary," she answered quietly, then quickly added, "But that doesn't matter." The two stood in silence for a moment, the sound of rain pattering against the pavement filling the space between them. "You're right," Thomas said after a while. "Maybe your name doesn't matter right now, but you do, and that's something I can help with." She looked at him, unsure of what to say. There was an unfamiliar warmth in his words, a genuine care that she had not expected. It had been so long since someone spoke to her like that. "I'm fine," she said, but even she knew it wasn't true. Thomas stepped closer, his voice gentle. "I don't believe that. You're standing out here in the rain alone. There's nothing fine about that." Mary hesitated. She had spent so many years being strong for others, had pushed down her own needs for the sake of those who never even appreciated her. She didn't want to admit how much she hurt, how much she was struggling. She didn't want to be a burden anymore. But for the first time in a long time, she allowed herself to be vulnerable. Her shoulders trembled as she spoke. "I've lost everything," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "My family, my children, they don't want me anymore. They kicked me out. I have nowhere to go." The words hung in the air, heavy with the weight of years of sacrifice, of love given and not returned. Thomas's face softened even more, and he took another step toward her. "I'm sorry. I can't imagine what you must be feeling right now." Mary didn't say anything. Her eyes stared at the ground, not wanting to meet his gaze. She was embarrassed, ashamed of her situation, but Thomas didn't judge her. He didn't make her feel small. "Would you like to come inside?" he asked, his voice offering a warmth she hadn't felt in years. It's not much, but it's better than standing out here in the rain. She hesitated. She didn't want to accept charity. She didn't want to be a burden, but something in Thomas's eyes told her it was okay. Just for a little while, she murmured, feeling a faint flicker of hope she hadn't felt in ages. As they walked together through the rain, Thomas led her to a small, modest building tucked away on the edge of town. It wasn't grand, but it had warmth and life, things that Mary hadn't felt in a long time. She stepped inside, grateful for the refuge but also unsettled. Who was this man, and why was he being so kind to her? She had no answers, but for the first time in days. He felt a sense of relief, as if the rain might finally be letting up. But little did she know, this simple act of kindness would change the course of her life in ways she could never have imagined. And the man who had stepped into her world on that rainy night would turn out to be someone far more extraordinary than she could ever have guessed. The next few days passed in a blur of unfamiliarity and quiet relief. Mary had found herself a strange comfort in Thomas's small, unassuming home. It wasn't much, just a modest studio apartment tucked away in a corner of the city. But the warmth of it, the soft lighting, and the gentle hum of life made it feel like a sanctuary. For the first time in what felt like forever, she was no longer in constant fear of being turned away, of being alone. Each day, Thomas would leave for work in the morning, and she would stay behind, taking care of the place. It was a small, simple routine, but for Mary it was something new. It was normalcy. It was a space where she could breathe again. Thomas didn't press her to talk about her past. He didn't ask too many questions. Instead, he gave her the space she needed. In the evenings, he would bring home takeout, and they would sit at the tiny kitchen table, sharing quiet meals together. The conversation was light, polite, and easy, but underneath it all there was something deeper, something unsaid. Mary could feel it. One evening, as the two of them sat together at the table, Mary found herself looking at Thomas more intently than she had before. There was something about him that intrigued her, something about the way he carried himself, something in his eyes that suggested a life far more complicated than he let on. But every time she tried to ask him about it, he would deflect, changing the subject with a soft chuckle or a gentle smile. But tonight was different. For some reason, Mary felt the need to ask. "Thomas, can I ask you something?" she said, her voice hesitant. "Of course," he replied, setting down his fork and meeting her gaze. "Why are you helping me?" she asked, her voice small but direct. "I mean, you don't know me, you don't owe me anything. And yet here you are, letting me stay here, feeding me, helping me get back on my feet. Why?" Thomas leaned back in his chair, looking at her for a long moment. His eyes softened, and for the first time she noticed a flicker of something more, something personal, something he hadn't shared before. "Why?" he repeated almost to himself. "I suppose I could say it's because it's the right thing to do, but the truth is, it's more than that." Mary waited, her heart beating a little faster. There was an intensity in his voice now, a quiet passion that hinted at something unspoken. "You see, I've been where you are," Thomas continued, his voice low, almost as if he was speaking to himself more than to her. "A long time ago, I was in your position. I was lost, without anyone to turn to. It wasn't just the money. I had everything I needed, but I had lost something far more important. I lost the trust of the people I loved the most." Mary frowned, confused. "What do you mean, you lost the trust of the people you loved? How?" Thomas didn't answer right away. He stood up from the table and walked over to the window, his back to her. Mary felt a sense of curiosity creeping into her chest. She had never seen Thomas like this, so distant. He turned to face her, his eyes darker now, his voice heavy with something else. "I made mistakes, Mary. Big ones. I hurt the people I loved, my family, my friends. I was too wrapped up in my own world to see the damage I was causing, and when I finally realized it, it was too late. They had already turned away. I had no one left." Mary's heart ached as she listened to him. She knew what it felt like to be abandoned, to be cast aside by the people you thought would always be there. It wasn't just the physical separation, it was the emotional one, the hollow feeling that lingered long after the doors were shut. "I'm sorry," she said softly, her voice trembling slightly. "That must have been incredibly hard." Thomas nodded, his eyes searching the distance. It was, but it was the best thing that ever happened to me. Mary blinked, surprised. The best thing. Yes, Thomas said, turning back to her with a quiet intensity. Because that was when I realized something, that sometimes losing everything can teach you what really matters. It makes you see who you truly are and what you want to become. I knew I had to change. I had to fix the things I had broken. And when I finally did, I realized I had learned something crucial. Sometimes it's not about what we can get, but what we can give. He paused, letting his words sink in. Mary felt the weight of them. They were heavy, but they were true. And that's why I'm helping you, Thomas continued, because I know what it feels like to be abandoned. And I don't want you to feel that way. I know how it feels to lose everything, and I don't want that for you. Not again. Mary didn't know what to say. Her heart was full, but it was also confused. She had no idea what this man was trying to say, how his words were resonating so deeply with her, how they felt so familiar. But she understood one thing. Thomas had a depth of pain and loss that mirrored her own, and that made her feel less alone in a way she couldn't describe. I don't know how to repay you, she said finally, her voice small. I don't know what to say, but I don't want to be a burden. Thomas smiled, and this time it was a genuine smile, warm and sincere. You don't have to repay me, Mary. It's not about that. It's about helping each other when we can. It's about being there for the people who need it. Mary nodded slowly, absorbing his words. She couldn't deny that he had given her more than just a place to stay. He had given her a chance to feel like a person again, to feel like she mattered. As the days went on, their routine continued. Thomas went to work, and Mary stayed behind, adjusting to the life she had found in this small apartment. It was humble, but it was hers now. And every day she felt a little more at peace, a little more hopeful that maybe, just maybe, there was a way out of the darkness. But even though she had begun to heal, there were still unanswered questions, still mysteries that hung in the air like shadows. There was something about Thomas, something she couldn't quite put her finger on. He was a man with a past, with secrets he hadn't shared. And though she didn't know it yet, those secrets were about to catch up with them both. The weeks that followed felt like a slow but steady climb for Mary. She had grown used to the comfort of the small apartment and the quiet rhythm of her new life. Thomas continued to be kind, supportive, and generous, offering her both his home and his time. The meals they shared were simple, but every bite felt like a small act of redemption. She felt like she was finally starting to breathe again, free from the suffocating weight of her past. But while Mary had begun to heal, there was still a nagging feeling deep inside her. It wasn't just the emptiness left by her own family's rejection. It was something else, something about Thomas that she couldn't quite understand. He was kind, yes, but there was always a guardedness to him, a quiet mystery. She had noticed it from the first time they had met, but as the days went on, she couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to his story than he had let on. Every time she tried to ask about his past, he would change the subject or offer a brief, cryptic answer. It was as though he was hiding something, and no matter how many times she tried to dig deeper, he always managed to divert the conversation in a different direction. But Mary wasn't one to give up easily. She knew there was a reason he was helping her, something beyond simple kindness. And the more she thought about it, the more she realized that maybe it wasn't just about her. Maybe Thomas needed her too. One evening, as they sat in the small kitchen, the smell of dinner filling the room, Mary couldn't contain her curiosity any longer. Thomas, she began, her voice soft but firm, I need to ask you something. Thomas looked up from his plate, his expression neutral but attentive. What's on your mind? You've done so much for me, she said, pausing as she gathered her thoughts, and I don't understand why. You've been nothing but kind, but there's something you're not telling me. I can feel it. I've tried to ignore it, but I can't anymore. Thomas set down his fork, his gaze shifting to the window as though he were searching for the right words. He exhaled slowly, and Mary could see the weight of his thoughts, the tension in his shoulders. I don't know if I should be telling you this, he said, his voice low. It's not something I talk about, but I guess it's time you know the truth. Mary leaned forward, her heart quickening. There was a finality in his tone, a sense that whatever he was about to say would change everything. Years ago, he began, his eyes distant, I had everything, A family, a successful business. I had it all. But I also had a secret, something I was hiding from everyone, including the people closest to me. And that secret, well, it destroyed everything. Mary's brow furrowed in confusion. What secret? What happened? Thomas shook his head, a sad smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. I thought I could keep it hidden. I thought I could protect the people I loved from it, but I was wrong. He paused for a moment, gathering his thoughts. Mary waited, her breath held as she sensed the gravity of the situation. I had a partner, he said, his voice quieter now. A business partner, a man I trusted, someone I considered a friend. But he wasn't who I thought he was. He was involved in things, illegal things, and I had no idea. I didn't know until it was too late. Mary sat back, her mind racing. You were involved in something illegal. Thomas's eyes met hers, and for the first time she saw a flicker of guilt, of regret. No, I wasn't involved, but I was blind. I trusted the wrong person. I helped him cover up his mistakes, and when it all came crashing down, I lost everything. My business, my family, they all turned their backs on me. The scandal destroyed everything I had worked for. Mary's heart ached for him. She could see the pain in his eyes, the rawness of the memories that haunted him. I'm sorry, she whispered. That sounds awful. He nodded, his expression somber. It was, but that's not the worst part. The worst part was the betrayal. I never saw it coming. I never expected that someone I trusted so much would do something like that. And when I found out, it was too late. The damage was done. Mary couldn't help but feel a surge of sympathy for him. She understood what it felt like to be betrayed, to have someone you loved turn their back on you. It was the kind of pain that cut deep, that left scars that never truly healed. But how did you end up here? She asked softly. Why are you helping me? Thomas's gaze softened as he looked at her, his voice steady. Because I understand what it feels like to be broken. To feel like you've lost everything. I've been there. And I want to help you because I know how it feels to be on the edge of losing everything, to feel like you have nothing left to give. I've been where you are, and I don't want you to have to face that alone. Mary felt the weight of his words settle into her chest. She understood now. He wasn't just helping her out of kindness. He was helping her because he saw something of himself in her. He understood her pain, her fear, and he was trying to heal the wounds that both of them carried. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The silence was heavy with unspoken understanding. They both had their scars, scars that couldn't be seen but were felt deeply every single day. Finally, Thomas broke the silence, his voice quieter now. I know this isn't easy to hear. I don't want you to think that I'm some kind of hero, because I'm not. I've made mistakes. But helping you, being here for you, is the one thing I can do that feels right. It's the one thing that doesn't feel like it's part of the mess I created. Mary nodded slowly, her heart swelling with a mix of gratitude and sadness. She had come to trust him, to rely on him, and now she understood why. He wasn't just a kind stranger. He was someone who had walked through the darkness and had come out the other side, willing to lend a hand to someone who needed it. I don't know what to say, Mary whispered, her voice thick with emotion. I don't know how to thank you for everything you've done. You don't have to thank me, Thomas replied softly. Just let me help you, let me be here for you. And in that moment, Mary realized something profound. They weren't so different after all. They both had been broken by life circumstances, but they had found each other, and somehow that made everything seem a little more bearable. Little did they know, this was just the beginning of a journey neither of them could have predicted, a journey that would test their strength, their trust, and their ability to heal the wounds of the past. But for now, they sat together in silence, knowing that for the first time in a long while, they were no longer alone. The next few weeks seemed to stretch on forever for Mary. She was beginning to settle into her new life, but something still gnawed at her, a feeling she couldn't quite shake. It wasn't just the pain of her past, the memories of rejection from her family, or the constant weight of survival. It was something about Thomas, something in the way he behaved, the way he always seemed to be running from something. Even after he'd told her about his past, there were still gaps in his story, things he hadn't fully explained. And though Mary was grateful for his kindness, she couldn't help but wonder if he was still hiding something. His eyes would sometimes darken when she asked too many questions. or he would change the subject so smoothly that it felt deliberate. There were parts of him, she realized, that she hadn't fully discovered. And it made her feel like she was only seeing a fraction of the man who had so generously opened his home to her. She found herself more and more preoccupied with the idea of Thomas's past. It wasn't just curiosity, it was a gnawing need to understand him better. She couldn't move forward in her own life if she couldn't get a clearer picture of the man who had come into her world so unexpectedly. It was on one quiet evening when the unease within her finally reached a tipping point. The apartment was warm, and the light from the kitchen cast a soft glow across the small living room. The faint hum of the refrigerator was the only sound, and for a moment the silence was almost deafening. Thomas had just returned home after another long day at work, his usual tired smile on his face. But there was something different about him tonight. He looked distant, lost in thought, as though there was something weighing heavily on his mind. Mary couldn't hold back any longer. "Thomas," she began, her voice tentative, "I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me." He paused, his hand hovering over the door to the refrigerator. She could see the flicker of uncertainty in his eyes, but he didn't say anything. He simply waited for her to continue. "I know you've told me about your past," she said slowly, choosing her words carefully, "but there's more, isn't there? I can feel it. I need to understand. I need to know what really happened. Why did you? Why did you lose everything, and why do you still seem to be running from it?" Thomas turned away from her, staring out the window, his posture tense. He was silent for a long moment, and Mary could almost hear the conflict inside him. She had never seen him like this before, not this vulnerable, not this broken. "I don't want to go back there," he said quietly, almost to himself. "It's too painful." Mary stood up from the couch and took a step closer to him. "I know. But I can't keep pretending that I don't see the pieces you're not telling me. Please, Thomas. I need to know, for both our sakes. I'm not going to judge you." For a long time he didn't speak. Mary's heart was in her throat. She had pushed him to the edge, but she didn't know if he would give her the answers she was looking for, or if he would retreat into silence once again. Finally, Thomas turned to face her, his eyes dark with emotion. "You're right," he said, his voice rough. "I've been hiding from my past for too long, but I don't know if I'm ready to share it. It's too much. It's too messy." Mary felt a pang in her chest. She could see how much pain was in his words, how deeply it affected him. She knew she couldn't force him to talk, but the need to understand was overwhelming. "You don't have to tell me everything," she said softly. Just tell me what happened. What is it that you're running from?" He exhaled slowly, as if weighing the decision in his mind. The silence that hung between them was thick with unspoken words. Finally, Thomas took a deep breath and began to speak. "After the scandal," he started, his voice trembling slightly, "after everything fell apart, I tried to rebuild. I tried to pick up the pieces of my life, but it wasn't enough. The damage was done, and the person who betrayed me, it was someone I never thought I would have to worry about, someone I trusted with my life." Mary's heart skipped a beat. Who was it? Thomas closed his eyes for a brief moment, as though the name was too much to say. "My own brother." Mary's breath caught in her throat. Your brother." He nodded, a bitter laugh escaping his lips. "I know, it sounds crazy, but it's true. I never saw it coming. He was the one person I thought I could trust more than anyone else in the world. We had grown up together, built everything together. But when the pressure became too much, when things started to go south, he made a choice that cost me everything." Mary's mind raced. "But why? Why would your own brother do something like that?" Thomas ran a hand through his hair, his face a mixture of frustration and sorrow. "He got greedy. He saw the success we had built, the power, the wealth, and he wanted more. He wanted it all. And when things started to unravel, instead of admitting the mistakes, instead of taking responsibility, he covered it up. He lied. He framed me for everything. He turned everyone against me, and when it was over, I was left with nothing. No business, no family, just me." Mary's heart ached for him. She could hear the raw pain in his voice, the betrayal that still haunted him. To lose everything because of someone you trusted, that was a wound that would never fully heal. I don't know what to say," she whispered, her voice barely audible. That's awful." Thomas gave her a small, rueful smile. Yeah, it was, but I survived, I had to, and I learned a lot about myself. About who I really am, and about who I can really trust. Mary took a tentative step toward him, her heart filled with empathy. But what about now? What about your brother? Have you ever tried to reach out to him? Thomas's eyes darkened and his shoulders tensed. I did. I tried to make amends, but he's gone. Not just physically, he's cut me out of his life completely. He's vanished. I've heard rumors, but I don't know where he is, and honestly, I don't care anymore. There was a long pause as Mary processed his words. She could sense the anger and hurt that lingered in his heart, but she also felt something else, something deeper. Something that suggested Thomas was still carrying that weight with him, and it wasn't just the betrayal. It was the guilt, the shame, the feeling that maybe he hadn't done enough to protect himself. I'm sorry, Thomas, she said softly, reaching out to place a hand on his arm. I can't imagine what that must feel like. To have everything taken from you like that, it must have been crushing. He nodded, his eyes staring into the distance. It was, but it made me stronger. It made me realize that the things I thought mattered, they didn't. It wasn't the money, the business, or even the family. It was the relationships, the trust. And when that's broken, there's nothing left. Mary stood there in silence, her hand still resting gently on his arm. She had always felt like an outsider in her own family, but hearing Thomas's story made her realize that pain was universal. Everyone carried their own burdens, their own scars. And while she had been rejected, Thomas had been betrayed by the one person who should have been there for him. They were both broken in different ways, but together they were learning how to heal. I won't run anymore, Thomas said quietly, his voice steady. I won't hide from my past, and I won't let it define me anymore. I'm here, Mary. And I'm not going anywhere. Mary looked up at him, her heart swelling with gratitude and understanding. For the first time, she felt like she wasn't the only one carrying a heavy load. And that made everything seem just a little bit lighter. Together they would face the past. No more running, no more hiding. And maybe, just maybe, they would find a way to heal one step at a time. The air was cool and crisp as Mary stepped out onto the small balcony of the apartment, the evening breeze ruffling her hair. It had been a few days since their conversation about Thomas's past. And while it had been difficult for both of them to confront the painful truths, something had shifted between them. There was a subtle understanding now, a quiet respect that had blossomed in the wake of their shared vulnerability. Mary felt as though she had known Thomas for much longer than she actually had. They had both been through so much, and in many ways they had been carrying the weight of their experiences alone. But now things were different. They had opened up to each other, and though the past could never be fully erased, there was a sense of healing in the air, an unspoken promise that they would move forward together. Yet, as much as she wanted to believe in that promise, there was still something she couldn't shake. A nagging feeling that she wasn't quite as close to the truth as she thought. Even after everything that had been said, she still didn't know everything about Thomas. There were still gaps in his story, things he had yet to reveal. And while she understood that some parts of the past were too painful to revisit, there was a part of her that wanted to know it all, the full, unfiltered truth. Mary took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. She knew she needed to address this feeling, to confront the lingering uncertainty. She couldn't keep living in the shadows of half-truths, not when she had finally found something worth holding on to. When Thomas came home that evening, there was a calmness about him. His usual tired smile was still there, but there was a peace in his eyes that hadn't been there before. He stepped into the living room and hung up his jacket, noticing her standing by the window. "Something on your mind?" he asked, his voice warm, but there was a hint of concern in his eyes. Mary turned to face him, her heart pounding slightly in her chest. She had thought about this moment 1,000 times, rehearsed what she would say, but now that it was here, the words seemed to catch in her throat. "I've been thinking," she began slowly, choosing her words carefully, "about everything you've told me. About your past and what you've been through. I know it hasn't been easy for you, and I've seen how hard you've tried to rebuild your life." Thomas's gaze softened and he stepped closer to her. "Mary, I know what you're about to say. I know you're still processing all of this, and I get it. It's a lot to take in." No, she interrupted, shaking her head. It's not just that, it's about us, Thomas. I've been thinking about what comes next for both of us. I can't help but wonder, where do we go from here? The words hung in the air between them, and for a moment, Thomas didn't say anything. He seemed to be weighing her question, searching for the right response. Mary's chest tightened as she waited for him to speak, her mind racing with all the possibilities, all the uncertainties that still lay ahead. I don't know, Mary, he finally said, his voice low. But I do know one thing, we've both been running for so long. I've been running from my past, and you've been running from the pain of losing your family. But now, maybe it's time for us to stop running. Mary felt a lump form in her throat at his words. She had always felt like she was chasing something, always looking for a place where she could finally feel at home. But now, standing here with Thomas, she realized that maybe she had already found that place. Maybe it wasn't about the destination, but about the journey they were on together. Maybe it is time, she whispered, her voice barely audible. But I need to know, are you ready to let go of the past, to move forward with me, or is there still something holding you back? Thomas's eyes darkened, and for a moment she saw the same pain she had seen in him all those weeks ago. It was a look she recognized all too well, the look of someone who had been betrayed, who had been hurt beyond measure. But this time there was something else in his eyes, too, a flicker of hope, a desire to move forward to heal. I don't know if I can ever fully let go of the past, he admitted, his voice quiet. But I'm willing to try, for you, for us. Mary's heart skipped a beat at his words. She had known that he carried the weight of his past with him, that he would never be able to completely forget the betrayal and the heartbreak. But hearing him say that he was willing to try for their future, that meant everything to her. I'm willing to try too, she said softly, her voice steady with newfound resolve. I don't know what the future holds, but I know that I want to face it with you. I don't want to run anymore either. I want to build something together. I want to move forward. Thomas stepped closer, his eyes searching hers for any hint of doubt. But there was none. She meant every word she said. I don't know what that looks like yet, he said, his voice thick with emotion. But I know that whatever it is, we'll face it together. A sense of peace washed over Mary in that moment, as if a weight had been lifted from her shoulders. For the first time in a long time, she felt like she was exactly where she was meant to be. Not running, not hiding, but standing here with Thomas, ready to face whatever came next. She reached out to him, her hand trembling slightly as she took his. The warmth of his touch grounded her, reminding her that they were no longer alone in their pain. They were no longer defined by their pasts. Together they could create something new. We'll make it work, she said, her voice firm with determination. I don't know what the future holds, but I'm not afraid anymore. Thomas smiled at her, a smile that was full of relief, of hope, and of something deeper, something that had been missing for far too long. Neither am I, he said softly. As they stood there, holding hands in the quiet of the apartment, Mary realized that moving forward didn't mean forgetting the past. It didn't mean erasing the pain or pretending that everything was perfect. But it did mean choosing to live in the present, to take the next step forward together, no matter how uncertain the future might seem. And for the first time in what felt like forever, she was ready to take that step. With Thomas by her side, she knew that they could face anything. Together, they would move forward. Together, they would heal. Together, they would build a future. The sun was setting behind the city skyline, casting long shadows across the apartment. The golden light filtered through the blinds, creating a warm, almost magical glow in the room. Mary sat on the couch, her hands folded in her lap as she watched Thomas in the kitchen, quietly preparing dinner. They had fallen into a peaceful routine over the past few weeks, one that brought a sense of comfort and stability that both of them had been searching for. Despite the new beginnings they had both started to embrace, Mary still felt the weight of the journey ahead. She had found peace in Thomas's company, and together they had worked through so many of the emotional scars from their pasts. But there was still a part of her, an instinct perhaps, that made her wonder if they were truly ready to face the future. To truly let go of the pain and rebuild their lives together. But tonight felt different. There was something in the air, a change she couldn't quite put into words. Maybe it was the calmness of the evening, or the fact that Thomas had been quieter than usual, as if he was contemplating something important. Whatever it was, Mary felt a shift in the atmosphere, something that signaled that the next chapter in their story was about to begin. She stood up and walked toward the kitchen, where Thomas was humming softly to himself as he stirred a pot on the stove. The sight of him in that moment, so at ease, so comfortable in his own skin, made her heart swell with affection. She had watched him slowly open up over the past few weeks, the walls he had built around himself gradually coming down. It wasn't always easy for him, and there were days when the past would resurface in quiet moments of reflection. But he was learning to live in the present, and that was something she admired deeply. "Smells good in here," she said, leaning against the doorframe. Thomas turned, a smile spreading across his face. "You're just saying that because you know I'm cooking your favorite." She chuckled, the familiar warmth of their banter filling the room. "Maybe, but it does smell pretty amazing. I think you might be turning into a great cook." "I'm just trying to make up for all the takeout we've been eating," he replied with a wink. "Besides, I know you deserve something better than frozen pizza." Mary's smile faded slightly as she watched him. The lightheartedness in his tone was genuine, but there was something behind his eyes. Something that made her wonder if he was still carrying something heavy in his heart. "Are you okay?" she asked, her voice soft. Thomas hesitated, the smile slipping from his face for just a moment. He set the spoon down on the counter and walked over to where she stood, his gaze steady. "I'm fine, Mary, it's just, I've been thinking a lot lately. About us, about where we're going." Mary's heart skipped a beat. She had known this conversation was coming, but now that it was here, she wasn't sure what to expect. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice quiet but filled with curiosity. "I mean, I've been thinking about our future," Thomas said, his voice steady but tinged with a trace of uncertainty. "I know we've been through a lot, and I know we've both been scarred by our pasts, but I think it's time to make some real decisions about what comes next. For both of us." Mary felt a tightness in her chest. The weight of his words settled over her like a heavy fog. She had spent so much time focusing on the present, on healing and rebuilding, that she hadn't really considered what the future held. The idea of looking ahead, really looking ahead, felt both exciting and terrifying all at once. "Do you mean moving forward, together?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Thomas nodded slowly, his eyes never leaving hers. "Yes. I think we need to make a choice. We've both been running from the past, but we can't keep looking over our shoulders forever. We need to decide what we want for the future, and what that future looks like." Mary's heart raced as she absorbed his words. It felt like everything was leading up to this moment, the culmination of everything they had been through, everything they had shared. And yet she couldn't help but feel a sense of fear rising in her chest. What if they weren't ready? What if they were rushing into something they didn't fully understand? But then, looking at Thomas, she saw something she hadn't seen before. There was a quiet strength in him, a sense of resolve that hadn't been there when they first met. He had changed just as she had, they both had. And in that moment, she realized that they had already come so far, farther than either of them had imagined. Maybe the next step wasn't as scary as it seemed. "I want to move forward," Mary said, her voice steady now as the words came more easily. "I want to build something with you, Thomas. I want to see where we can go together." Thomas's eyes softened, and for a moment he said nothing. Then finally he reached out and took her hand in his, holding it gently but with purpose. "I'm glad you said that. Because I feel the same way. I want to build something with you too. I've spent so much of my life trying to fix what's broken, but now, I think it's time to focus on what we can create, together." A sense of peace washed over Mary as she heard his words. They weren't just words, they were a promise to face the future, whatever it might bring, side by side. Thomas took a deep breath and his expression shifted. "There's one more thing I've been thinking about. I've been so focused on rebuilding my life, on fixing everything that's gone wrong. But there's one thing I never really thought about. The person who's been here with me through all of it. You, Mary. You've helped me more than I can say, and I need to ask you something important." Mary's pulse quickened, her heart pounding in her chest. She had no idea what was coming, but she could feel the weight of the moment. What is it? Thomas gave her a small, nervous smile. I've been thinking about the future we're going to build, and I can't imagine it without you. You've been the one constant in my life these past few months. You've been my strength, and you've shown me what it means to really live again. And I want to ask you if you'll be with me, not just for now, but for the long haul. Will you build this life with me, Mary? Mary's breath caught in her throat, and for a moment she couldn't speak. His words hung in the air, heavy with emotion. She had never expected this, never thought she would hear him say it. But as the words settled in her mind, she realized that it was exactly what she had wanted, too. She wanted to build a future with him. She wanted to take the next step, to keep growing and learning together. Tears welled up in her eyes as she looked at him, her heart swelling with love and gratitude. Yes, she said, her voice thick with emotion. Yes, Thomas, I want that too. I want to be with you. He smiled, and this time it was a smile of pure happiness. The kind of smile that told her everything she needed to know. They didn't need all the answers yet. They didn't need to know exactly how everything would unfold. But together, they were ready to face whatever came their way. And in that moment, standing there with Thomas, Mary realized that this was the beginning of something new, something real. It wasn't about erasing the past or forgetting the pain they had both experienced. It was about moving forward, hand in hand, ready to create a future filled with love, trust, and hope. They didn't have to have it all figured out. They didn't have to be perfect. But they had each other, and that was enough. And for the first time in a long time, Mary knew that everything would be okay.